What's shaping up to be one of the most complex winter storm forecasts we've seen this season? Massive changes in the afternoon model runs, especially for the eastern United States, with significant disagreement between the European and GFS models. We're going to discuss the central U.S. first, break down the eastern U.S. situation, and then geek out about the atmospheric dynamics that are making this system so fascinating and challenging to forecast. Let me be clear about something right up front. We're still trying to iron out the details on this one. The models have shifted dramatically in the last 24 hours, and I'm not fully convinced by either solution we're seeing. This could easily shift northward or southward, and the timing is still under debate. But here's what we know with reasonable confidence, and I'll walk you through the uncertainty as we go. Winter storm watches extend all the way from San Antonio, Texas, transitioning into extreme cold watches, then up through Dallas-Fort Worth, Oklahoma City, Little Rock, Memphis, Nashville, extending into Louisville, Cincinnati, Charleston, West Virginia, all the way to the D.C. corridor. We're looking at winter weather advisories reaching Richmond, Baltimore, and potentially up into Philadelphia. Ice storm warnings are posted across the teal-colored zones, covering portions of Arkansas, Tennessee, and Kentucky. The pink zones indicate winter storm warnings where we expect primarily snow. Purple areas stretching from southern Illinois through Indiana and Ohio represent regions where we could see significant accumulations, potentially exceeding 12 inches in some locations. Let's start with Texas and work our way northeast. San Antonio sits right on the southern edge of this system. You're looking at precipitation beginning Friday evening around 5 p.m., starting as a cold rain before transitioning to sleet by midnight. The European model keeps light precipitation going through Saturday morning, mainly sleet accumulation of 1 to 3 inches. Austin sees a similar setup, beginning Friday evening around 6 p.m., with the transition to sleet happening faster due to slightly colder air. Dallas-Fort Worth, this is where it gets interesting. Starting Friday evening around 6 p.m., beginning as snow, transitioning to sleet and freezing rain by midnight. Peak intensity Saturday morning. The European model shows this continuing through Sunday morning, but the GFS is drier and faster. Fort Worth specifically could see 3 to 6 inches of sleet accumulation. Waco starts around 7 p.m. Friday, mainly sleet overnight. Tyler and Longview in East Texas begin around 8 p.m. Friday, with a longer window of freezing rain possible into Saturday afternoon. Houston, you're on the extreme southern edge. Cold rain Friday night, transitioning to brief sleet Saturday morning, mainly a cold rain event for you. Corpus Christi stays all rain. Beaumont sees rain changing to sleet Saturday morning, brief period of accumulation possible. Lubbock and Amarillo in the Panhandle. You're looking at snow beginning Friday afternoon, 3 to 7 inches possible before ending Saturday morning. Abilene starts Friday evening, snow changing to sleet overnight, 2 to 5 inches combined accumulation. El Paso misses most of this system entirely, staying dry. Oklahoma City, you're right in the heart of the uncertainty. Beginning Friday evening around 7 p.m. as snow, rapidly transitioning to sleet and freezing rain by 10 p.m. The European model shows significant ice accumulation, potentially 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch of ice, with sleet accumulation of 4 to 7 inches on top of that. This is a dangerous setup for you. Peak intensity Saturday morning through early afternoon. Tulsa has a similar timeline, but starting about an hour later. Norman, Lawton, same story, Friday evening into Saturday. Arkansas is where we transition from ice dominant to snow dominant, depending on which model verifies. Little Rock begins Friday evening around 8 p.m., starting as snow, quickly mixing with sleet by 11 p.m., then potentially heavy freezing rain Saturday morning. The European model is brutal for Little Rock, showing ice accumulation approaching 1 inch. The GFS is slightly better, keeping more sleet and less freezing rain. Fort Smith starts around 7 p.m. Friday. Better chance of staying snow longer before mixing. Fayetteville in northwest Arkansas, you're in the favored snow zone, beginning Friday evening, 6 to 12 inches possible by Saturday night. Jonesboro starts later, around 10 p.m. Friday, snow mixing with sleet overnight. Pine Bluff begins around 9 p.m. Friday, ice will be the main concern Saturday morning. Louisiana sees the southern fringe. Shreveport begins Friday night around 10 p.m., mainly sleet and freezing rain. Significant ice accumulation possible. Monroe has a similar setup starting around 11 p.m. Friday. Baton Rouge and New Orleans stay mostly rain, perhaps brief sleet Saturday morning. Lafayette sees cold rain, maybe a touch of sleet. Alexandria begins around midnight Friday into Saturday morning, sleet and freezing rain likely. Mississippi gets hit hard with ice. Jackson begins Friday night around 11 p.m., starting as sleet, transitioning to freezing rain Saturday morning. This is a major ice storm setup for the capital city, potentially 1/2 to 1 inch of ice accumulation. Gulfport and Hattiesburg see mainly cold rain with brief sleet possible Saturday morning. Tupelo in North Mississippi begins around 10 p.m. Friday. Better snow chances initially before transitioning to sleet and ice. Meridian starts around midnight. Sleet and ice dominant. Tennessee is fascinating because we're seeing a Miller B track here, which creates a sharp gradient. Memphis begins Friday night around 9 p.m., starting as snow, quickly transitioning to sleet and freezing rain by Saturday morning. The European model shows significant ice accumulation. The GFS is a bit faster and drier. Nashville, this is a critical forecast point, beginning Friday night around 10 p.m. as snow. The question is how long you stay snow before mixing. The European model mixes you to sleet and freezing rain by Saturday morning. The GFS keeps you snow longer, potentially 6 to 10 inches. I think the truth will be somewhere in between. Probably 4 to 7 inches of snow before mixing reduces your totals. Knoxville begins around midnight Friday into Saturday, mainly snow, 5 to 9 inches possible. Chattanooga starts around 11 p.m. Friday, snow transitioning to sleet Saturday morning, 4 to 8 inches combined. Clarksville begins around 9 p.m. Friday, similar to Nashville. Kentucky is where the models really diverge. Louisville begins Friday night around 11 p.m., starting as snow. The European model has you transitioning to sleet and freezing rain by Saturday afternoon, limiting accumulations to 4 to 7 inches. The GFS keeps you snow much longer, potentially 8 to 14 inches. Lexington starts around midnight, mainly snow, 6 to 12 inches depending on model solution. Bowling Green begins around 10 p.m. Friday. Snow transitioning to mix Saturday, 5 to 10 inches. Owensboro starts around 10 p.m. Friday. Snow dominant, 6 to 11 inches possible. Paducah in western Kentucky begins around 9 p.m. Friday. More mixing likely, 4 to 8 inches. Missouri sees the northern edge. Kansas City begins Friday evening around 6 p.m. Snow, 3 to 6 inches before ending Saturday morning. St. Louis starts Friday night around 8 p.m. Snow, 4 to 8 inches possible by Saturday evening. Springfield begins around 7 p.m. Friday. Snow, 5 to 10 inches in the forecast. Columbia starts around 8 p.m. Friday. Snow, 4 to 9 inches. Joplin begins around 6 p.m. Friday. Snow, 4 to 7 inches possible. Illinois catches the northern extent of heavier snow. Chicago, you're on the very northern edge. Light snow Friday night, 2 to 4 inches possible. Springfield begins Friday night around 9 p.m. Snow, 6 to 11 inches in the bullseye zone. Peoria starts around 8 p.m. Friday. Snow, 5 to 10 inches likely. Rockford sees light snow Friday night into Saturday, 1 to 3 inches. Champaign begins around 10 p.m. Friday. Snow, 7 to 13 inches possible. You're in the favored zone. Indiana is in the heart of the uncertainty. Indianapolis begins Friday night around 11 p.m. Snow. The European model shows 8 to 14 inches. The GFS shows 10 to 16 inches. You're in the bullseye regardless of which solution verifies. Fort Wayne starts around midnight. Snow, 6 to 12 inches. Evansville begins around 10 p.m. Friday. Snow transitioning to sleet Saturday afternoon, 5 to 10 inches combined. South Bend starts around midnight. Snow, 4 to 9 inches. Bloomington begins around 11 p.m. Friday. Snow, 7 to 13 inches possible. Ohio is prime real estate for this system. Columbus begins around midnight Friday into Saturday. Heavy snow, 8 to 15 inches possible. The European model has the axis of heaviest snow right over central Ohio. Cleveland starts around 1 a.m. Saturday. Snow, 6 to 12 inches. Cincinnati begins around 11 p.m. Friday, starting as snow, potentially mixing Saturday afternoon on the southern edge, 6 to 12 inches before any mixing. Toledo starts around midnight, snow, 5 to 10 inches. Dayton begins around midnight, snow, 7 to 14 inches. You're in the bullseye. Akron starts around 1 a.m. Saturday, snow, 6 to 12 inches possible. Michigan sees the northern fringe. Detroit begins around 2 a.m. Saturday, snow, 4 to 8 inches possible by Saturday night. Grand Rapids starts around 3 a.m. Saturday, snow, 3 to 7 inches. Lansing begins around 2 a.m. Saturday, snow, 4 to 9 inches. Ann Arbor starts around 2 a.m. Saturday, snow, 5 to 10 inches possible. Wisconsin catches lighter amounts. Milwaukee begins Saturday morning around 4 a.m. Snow, 2 to 5 inches. Madison starts around 3 a.m. Saturday, snow, 3 to 6 inches. Green Bay begins Saturday morning, light snow, 1 to 4 inches possible. Now here's where the forecast gets really complex for the east. We've got cold air damming setting up east of the Appalachians. This is critical to understand. What's happening atmospherically is fascinating. We've got low pressure tracking right up the Tennessee Valley. This is what meteorologists call a Miller B setup. That brings warm air to the surface across Alabama and Georgia, but the cold air is locked in place east of the Appalachians. This creates what we call cold air damming. You've got dense, cold air that's stubborn. It doesn't want to move, and it's wedging in against the mountains. Georgia sees this play out dramatically. Atlanta begins Saturday morning around 6 a.m., starting as rain, but with temperatures hovering right around 32 degrees Fahrenheit, we could see a transition to sleet and freezing rain by Saturday afternoon. The European model shows significant ice accumulation for the northern suburbs, potentially 1/4 to 1/2 inch. Augusta starts Saturday morning around 8 a.m. Cold rain transitioning to sleet briefly. Savannah stays mainly rain. Athens begins Saturday morning around 7 a.m. Rain changing to sleet and freezing rain. Ice accumulation likely. Macon sees mainly cold rain. The Carolinas are where cold air damming really asserts itself. Charlotte begins Saturday morning around 5 a.m., starting as sleet and freezing rain immediately due to the wedge. Peak intensity Saturday afternoon. We're looking at significant ice accumulation, potentially 1/4 to 3/4 of an inch. This is a crippling ice storm scenario for you. Raleigh starts Saturday morning around 6 a.m. Sleet and freezing rain. The wedge keeps you cold. Ice accumulation of 1/4 to 1/2 inch likely. Greensboro begins around 5 a.m. Saturday, sleet and freezing rain dominant, significant ice. Durham has the same timeline as Raleigh. Winston-Salem starts around 5 a.m. Saturday, sleet and ice. Asheville in the mountains begins Friday night around midnight, starting as snow, 6 to 12 inches possible before transitioning to sleet Saturday. Fayetteville starts Saturday morning around 7 a.m. Sleet and freezing rain likely. South Carolina sees the southern extent of the wedge. Columbia begins Saturday morning around 6 a.m., starting as rain, potentially transitioning to sleet by Saturday afternoon if cold air holds. Charleston stays rain throughout. Greenville starts Saturday morning around 5 a.m. Sleet and freezing rain due to proximity to mountains. Ice accumulation likely. Spartanburg begins around 5 a.m. Saturday. Similar to Greenville, Rock Hill starts around 6 a.m. Saturday. Sleet and ice. Virginia is fascinating because Richmond sits right on the boundary. Richmond begins Saturday morning around 7 a.m. The European model starts you as sleet and freezing rain. The GFS starts you as snow before mixing. This is highly uncertain. Could see anywhere from 2 to 6 inches of snow if you stay cold, or significant ice if you warm up. Virginia Beach and Norfolk begin Saturday morning around 9 a.m. Mainly rain with brief sleet possible. Roanoke starts Saturday morning around 4 a.m. Snow, 5 to 10 inches possible before mixing to sleet Saturday afternoon. Lynchburg begins around 5 a.m. Saturday, snow transitioning to sleet, 4 to 9 inches combined. Charlottesville starts around 6 a.m. Saturday, snow mixing with sleet, 3 to 8 inches. West Virginia is in the heart of the snow zone. Charleston begins Friday night around midnight. Snow, 8 to 15 inches possible. The European model has you right in the bullseye. Huntington starts around 11 p.m. Friday, snow, 7 to 13 inches. Morgantown begins around 1 a.m. Saturday, snow, 6 to 12 inches. Parkersburg starts around midnight. Snow, 7 to 14 inches possible. Maryland and D.C. This is the forecast that's changed the most in the last 12 hours. Baltimore begins Saturday morning around 8 a.m. The European model shows sleet and freezing rain initially, transitioning to snow Saturday afternoon. Total accumulation 3 to 7 inches with some ice. The GFS shows mainly snow, 5 to 11 inches. Frederick starts around 7 a.m. Saturday, snow, 4 to 10 inches. Hagerstown begins around 6 a.m. Saturday, snow, 5 to 12 inches. Washington, D.C. begins Saturday morning around 9 a.m. And I've got to tell you, this is one of the trickiest forecasts. The European model shows you starting as sleet and freezing rain, potentially significant ice accumulation Saturday morning, then transitioning to snow Saturday afternoon and evening. Total snow accumulation 3 to 8 inches after the ice. The GFS is more progressive, starts you as snow earlier, potentially 6 to 12 inches with less ice. Arlington and Alexandria have the same setup. Delaware sees mainly snow. Wilmington begins Saturday morning around 9 a.m. Snow, 4 to 9 inches possible. Dover starts around 10 a.m. Saturday, snow, 3 to 7 inches. Pennsylvania is prime snow territory depending on latitude. Philadelphia begins Saturday morning around 10 a.m. Starting as snow, potentially mixing with sleet, Saturday afternoon in the city, 6 to 12 inches possible, more in the northern suburbs. Pittsburgh starts Saturday morning around 2 a.m. Snow, 5 to 11 inches by Saturday night. Harrisburg begins around 8 a.m. Saturday, snow, 5 to 12 inches. Allentown starts around 9 a.m. Saturday, snow, 6 to 14 inches. You're in a favored zone. Erie begins Saturday morning around 1 a.m. Lake enhancement possible, 4 to 10 inches. Scranton starts around 8 a.m. Saturday, snow, 7 to 15 inches, possible. New Jersey gets significant snow. Newark begins Saturday morning around 10 a.m. Snow, potentially mixing briefly with sleet, 5 to 11 inches. Jersey City has the same timeline. Trenton starts around 9 a.m. Saturday, snow, 6 to 13 inches. Atlantic City begins around 11 a.m. Saturday, snow potentially mixing with sleet near the coast, 3 to 8 inches. New York. This is where we see potential for significant accumulations. New York City begins Saturday morning around 11 a.m. Snow, initially moderate, becoming heavy Saturday afternoon. 5 to 12 inches possible depending on exact track. More in northern suburbs, less near water. Buffalo starts Saturday morning around midnight. Lake enhancement likely. 8 to 16 inches possible by Sunday morning. Rochester begins around 1 a.m. Saturday. Snow, 7 to 14 inches. Syracuse starts around 2 a.m. Saturday. Snow, potentially heavy, 8 to 18 inches possible. Albany begins around 4 a.m. Saturday, snow, 6 to 14 inches. Connecticut sees heavy snow. Hartford begins Saturday morning around 9 a.m. Snow, becoming heavy Saturday afternoon, 7 to 15 inches possible. New Haven starts around 10 a.m. Saturday, snow, 6 to 13 inches. Stamford begins around 11 a.m. Saturday, snow, 5 to 11 inches. Bridgeport starts around 10 a.m. Saturday, snow, 6 to 12 inches. Massachusetts is in the heavy snow zone. Boston begins Saturday morning around 10 a.m. Snow, rapidly becoming heavy by afternoon. 8 to 18 inches possible. This could be a blockbuster for you. Worcester starts around 9 a.m. Saturday, snow, 9 to 20 inches possible in the bullseye. Springfield begins around 8 a.m. Saturday, snow, 7 to 16 inches. Cambridge has Boston's timeline. Rhode Island sees significant snow. Providence begins Saturday morning around 10 a.m. Snow, becoming heavy, 7 to 16 inches possible by Sunday morning. New Hampshire gets hammered. Manchester begins around 9 a.m. Saturday, snow, heavy at times, 8 to 17 inches possible. Nashua has a similar timeline and forecast. Vermont sees heavy snow. Burlington begins Saturday morning around 6 a.m. Snow, potentially very heavy, 10 to 20 inches possible by Sunday. Maine is in the jackpot zone. Portland begins around 11 a.m. Saturday. Snow, rapidly becoming heavy, 10 to 22 inches possible by Sunday afternoon. Lewiston starts around 10 a.m. Saturday. Snow, 11 to 24 inches possible. Bangor begins around noon Saturday. Snow, 8 to 18 inches. Now let's geek out about the atmospheric dynamics, because this is what makes this system so fascinating. We're dealing with a Miller B track, which means the primary low-pressure center is moving up the Tennessee Valley rather than along the coast. This is critical because it creates a warm nose, a layer of warm air aloft, which is why we're seeing so much sleet and freezing rain across the south. The surface temperatures are below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, but 2,000 to 5,000 feet up, temperatures are above freezing. So snow falls from the clouds, melts into rain, then refreezes as sleet or freezes on contact as freezing rain. The reason the models are diverging so much is due to the timing of a secondary low-pressure development off the coast. The European model develops a strong coastal low Saturday evening, which would enhance snowfall totals dramatically for the Northeast. The GFS is slower and weaker with coastal development, which keeps totals lower. These look like two extremes. I think the truth will be somewhere in between, but we won't know until we see the overnight model runs. There's also a dry slot that's complicating the forecast. This is a region of drier air that wraps around the southern side of the low-pressure system. The European model has a more pronounced dry slot, which would create a break in precipitation Saturday afternoon across parts of the mid-Atlantic. The GFS keeps precipitation more continuous. This matters for accumulation rates and timing. The deformation zone is where we expect the heaviest snow bands to set up. This is along the northwestern edge of the storm system, roughly from central Illinois through Indiana, Ohio, and into Pennsylvania and New York. This is where opposing wind fields create lift, and that's where we see snow ratios potentially exceeding 15 to 1, meaning very fluffy, high accumulation snow. What's also interesting is the potential for the coastal low to bomb out Saturday night. Bombing out means rapid intensification, defined as a pressure drop of 24 millibars in 24 hours. If this happens, we could see snowfall rates of 2 to 4 inches per hour across southern New England Saturday night into Sunday morning. That would push totals into the 2 to 3 foot range for portions of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine. The cold air damming east of the Appalachians is being reinforced by high pressure over eastern Canada. This high-pressure system is pumping fresh Arctic air southward, and that cold air is getting trapped against the mountains. It's like a dam, hence the name. This is why the Carolinas and Virginia stay so cold, even as warm air tries to move in aloft. The wedge of cold air at the surface is stubborn and doesn't want to move. We're also seeing overrunning, which is when warm, moist air rides up and over the cold air mass. This is the classic setup for freezing rain and sleet. The warm air doesn't mix out the cold air. It just flows over the top of it, creating that warm nose aloft while the surface stays below freezing. Let me show you what the snowfall maps are indicating. The European model has the main axis of heavy snow extending from southern Illinois through Indiana and Ohio, with a bullseye of over 12 inches, potentially 15 to 18 inches, where Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, and West Virginia come together. There's another bullseye across central Pennsylvania into upstate New York, with totals of 12 to 20 inches possible. The heaviest amounts, over 20 inches, are confined to the higher elevations of Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. The GFS is considerably different. Its main axis is further south, with the heaviest snow across Arkansas and Tennessee, 8 to 14 inches. It has lesser amounts further north, only 6 to 10 inches across Ohio and Pennsylvania. For New England, the GFS is in the 10 to 16 inch range, about 4 to 8 inches less than the European. For ice accumulation, the European model is more aggressive. It shows 1/2 to over 1 inch of ice accumulation from eastern Texas through Arkansas, Tennessee, and into Kentucky. There's another zone of significant ice, 1/4 to 3/4 of an inch, across the Carolinas and Virginia due to cold air damming. The GFS shows less ice overall, mainly because it's faster and drier. This is a high-impact event regardless of which model solution verifies. We're talking about significant travel disruption Friday night through Sunday morning across a huge portion of the eastern United States. Power outages are likely, especially in the ice zones. If you're in the warned areas, Friday is your day to prepare. Get supplies, charge devices, make sure you have a way to heat your home if power goes out. The timing uncertainty is about 6 to 12 hours depending on location. The European model is generally slower, which would start precipitation earlier and end it later. The GFS is faster, compressing the timeline. For planning purposes, I'd use the European timeline, the slower solution, so you're not caught off guard. Here's what I'm watching most closely. First, does the GFS trend slower and wetter, or does the European trend faster and drier? We've seen these models converge on solutions before, usually somewhere in the middle. Second, where exactly does the coastal low develop Saturday evening? If it's further south and east, the northeast gets less snow. If it's closer to the coast, the northeast jackpots. Third, how quickly does the wedge in the Carolinas erode? If it holds longer, more ice. If it breaks down faster, less ice but potentially more snow. The ensemble guidance is leaning toward the European solution, which gives me more confidence in the higher snow totals for the Midwest and Northeast and the significant ice threat for the South. But ensembles have been wrong before, and I'm not ready to completely dismiss the GFS. So to recap what we've covered, winter storm watches and warnings from Texas to Maine, a complex Miller B setup with significant ice threat for the South due to warm nose aloft, cold air damming creating an ice storm scenario for the Carolinas and Virginia. Heavy snow likely for the Midwest, Ohio Valley, and Northeast, with potential for over 20 inches in favored locations. Major model disagreement on exact track and timing, uncertainty of 6 to 12 hours. This is a high-impact, high-uncertainty forecast. We're running out of time to figure out the exact details, but here's what we know with high confidence. 1. This is a significant winter storm that will impact a large portion of the eastern United States. 2. Ice accumulation will be the primary threat from Texas through the Mid-South and into the Carolinas. 3. Heavy snow is likely from Illinois through the Northeast, with the potential for significant accumulations. 4. Timing is still uncertain, but the Friday night through Sunday morning window is when we expect the bulk of impacts. If you'd like a specific forecast for your city, or if I missed your location, leave it in the comments and I'll answer individually as time allows. I'll be back tomorrow morning with fresh model data, and we'll see which solution the overnight runs are trending toward. There's also another potential winter storm for next weekend that's showing up on the extended models. The European weeklies are showing a very favorable pattern for additional storms through the end of February and into early March, blocking over the Arctic, troughing over the east, and plenty of cold air available. This winter is far from over. If you found this breakdown helpful, subscribing to the channel would be appreciated. I'll continue to update this forecast as model runs come in. Stay safe out there. Prepare now if you're in the warned areas, and we'll get through this together.